Everybody, welcome to Facebook Live, Zoom Live. This is Charlotte Readers Podcast Live, and we're glad to be here. We normally have a audio program, but we're going to be doing a monthly video program this year in 2022 as a complement to the audio version of Charlotte Readers Podcast, where authors do voiced and written words. I'm Landis Wade. I'm the host. I'll be introducing my guests in just a minute. But I just want to tell you, we're up to 279 episodes now, and if the creek don't rise, we'll hit 300 sometime in June. And so, as I said before, I introduced Amber Smith and Paula Martinac. I'd like you to just know a little bit more about what we're doing here at Charlotte Readers Podcast. You can listen on the audio version anywhere you get your podcast. You can go to our website, charlottereaderspodcast.com. And if you go there, you'll find links to all the episodes, show notes with images. You'll have there's a historic guest list there, and Paul and Amber are on that list. You can scroll down, find them, and listen to them on Charlotte Readers Podcast. We've got a community blog there for readerly and writerly content, and we've got a vlog. That's a fancy way of saying we put videos on there too. And we've got more, and we've got a Patreon page too, where in addition to the 279 episodes on free podcast, we've got over 120 exclusive episodes where we talk about the craft and business of writing. But we're going to start something new here in a couple of months. We're going to be doing for our patrons 10 minutes of tips, suggestions for reading and writing. And so any of the authors that appear on the show will hang around for about 10 or 15 minutes and talk about the books they're reading, books they recommend, and I'll pick their brain about a couple of writing tips as well. So with that little prologue, let's get on with the show here. Hey, I am so happy, excited today to be here with Paula Martinac and Amber Smith. Both Paula and Amber have been on the podcast, as I said, very early on. I think, Paula, you were in the first season of the podcast. Yeah, and Amber, you weren't far behind there, and y'all are so prolific. You've written a couple more books since then. But just so people know who's who, Amber, raise your hand for everybody to see. There.
Hi, I'm Amber.
Yeah, and Paula. Yeah.
Hi.
There you go. I could have figured that out, I guess. If she raised her hand, they'd probably know who Paula was after that. So I'm going to do a little bit of bragging about y'all first, so that you don't have to do that part of your bio, and then I want to, get you to talk a little bit more about what you're doing, I'll probably ask you a few questions about what I didn't say about you in just a minute. But viewers, I have to say viewers. I usually say listeners, viewers. I guess we're into that. You see us now, kind of thing. Amber Smith is a New York Times bestselling author of young adult and middle grade novels, including The Way I Used to Be, The Last to Let Go, Something Like Gravity, and most recently, the book we're going to talk about tonight is the foundation for our discussion. It's her middle grade debut, codenamed Serendipity. She's been an advocate for increased awareness of mental health, gendered violence, and LGBTQIA plus equality. That's the longest I've seen that spelled out, but that's good. And she writes in the hope that her books can help to foster change and spark dialogue. Grew up in Buffalo, New York, now lives in Charlotte, and she can tell you about her cats and dogs. Amber, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Paula Martinac is the author of a book of short stories and 7 novels. Her debut novel, Out of Time, won the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction. Her novel, In Stories That Ate a Decades, which I think is the one we featured on the podcast.
That's right.
Was shortlisted for the 2017 Pharaoh Grumley Award for LGBTQ fiction, the Ford Indie Award, and the Goldie Award for historical fiction. And her novel, Cleo Rising, received the gold medal for best regional fiction from the 2020 Independent Book Publishers Award. She's published 3 nonfiction books on the LGBTQ themes. She's a lecturer in the creative writing program at UNC Charlotte. And her latest book that we'll talk about tonight is Dear Miss Cushman. Paula, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we'll kind of go in reverse order now, and I'm going to ask you each to, starting with you, Paula, just tell us a little bit something about yourself, maybe not in your bio, something, hey, we may not know by reading your website, and also why you enjoy writing the books that you do.
Yeah, I guess what I want to talk about is that I really have channeled my energies into writing LGBTQ themed historical fiction. I didn't start out that way, but that's really where I have headed in the last 5 to 6 years. And what I'm trying to do is I was a history buff, and I went to graduate school in history, and I think a lot of people have a bad image of history because it's often taught very badly in school. It's very boring and doesn't really bring people to life. And so what I'm trying to do in my fiction is really to bring characters from the past to life. And so many people are unfamiliar with LGBTQ history, and I think this is a way that I can help bring contributions of a whole set of people to the forefront. Contributions in social, political, cultural fabric, like Miss Cushman. Charlotte Cushman was a real historical figure. So that's kind of what I have been doing with my work.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Dear Miss Cushman in just a moment here. Amber, tell us a little bit about you, and maybe it wasn't in your regular bio, and why you enjoy writing, what you like to write.
Well, it's funny, Paula, you were just talking about, being a history buff, and so that's actually my background too, art history. So really different from contemporary fiction. But I've always sort of had, different creative outlets, and I started writing fiction, seriously, probably about 13 years ago when I moved to Charlotte, and it sort of stemmed out of doing nonfiction writing. So I was writing about visual art and artists and their backgrounds and biographies, and it really finally inspired me to, as rewarding and as much as I loved that work, being around creative people like that, it really made me want to start telling my own stories and making my own art. And so, I sort of fell into fiction in sort of a roundabout way.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the books that you've recently written, just because it's a great framework for what we're going to be talking about tonight. And tonight's topic is writing younger characters. And we have in Amber's book, which is codenamed Serendipity. It's an 11-year-old protagonist in the modern day. She starts out, meets a little dog. I'm gonna wait a minute. We're gonna talk more about that in a second. Paula's character in her book, Dear Miss Cushman, she's around 18 years old when she starts out in the mid 1800s in New York City, wants to be an actress. And I love the fact that we've got, characters that they're both young, but they're at different stages of young. And so that could add to our discussion today as well. I know these two authors have also written books in which they've had to go full range. So it's going to be a great discussion. Paula, let's start with you here with your book, Dear Miss Cushman. I will say this, and I said this to you before. I got through this book last night. I read most of this book last night. You see the bookmark. I'm almost finished. I don't know enough. I can't give away any spoilers yet, but I can talk about what happens up to about half of the book. So,
Okay.
So let's tell us about your protagonist, Georgiana, who goes by George Cartwright, and a little bit about the story.
Sure. As you said, it starts in 1852 in Manhattan. And Georgiana Cartwright is 18 years old. It's actually, her father is a famous stage actor, but he has a drinking problem. And the first time that she goes to see him perform on stage, he performs drunk and he disgraces himself. And then he's fired from his job and he disappears. And at that time, this was a terrible fate for his family, because his wife didn't earn a living. And so Georgie, also called George, takes it upon herself to make her way onto the stage, which she has always been interested in, and try to support the family. And she does that eventually in what were called breeches roles, which were they were roles written for men, such as Hamlet, but performed by women, and that was a really common thing at that time. So that's the basic framework of the story. It's kind of a coming of age novel for Georgie as she progresses over the course of about 6 months in her career.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about historical fiction is that you learn something about history. And I was learning things as I was reading this book about what it was like in New York City to go to these shows and to be a part of these shows. It's a really interesting sort of world. And it's also a world, Paula, is it not, where women, though they were so much subjugated at the time otherwise, as I think Georgiana took down somebody early on in the book by telling them that women were chattel, and she just didn't want to be a part of that whole world. In the theater, they could find their way and make some money, whereas otherwise it would have been more difficult.
Yeah, she's a middle class girl because her father, earned a good living as an actor. And yeah, women, there weren't a whole lot of options for women of her class, especially. It was mostly that she was supposed to get married, but she really wanted a career. She wanted to be on stage. And actually, actresses made a pretty good living. Charlotte Cushman, a real actress of that day, was, by our standards, a millionaire. She was a superstar. So she was able to earn a really, really good living. So it was something that I didn't really realize either, that that was one field that women could move forward in, though it did have its drawbacks too. It had a little bit of a taint of like you were like a public woman, almost, close to a prostitute, but you could earn a good living.
You have to be careful here and not to go down my podcast route and just dive into this book.
Okay.
Dive into her book, because we're going to be talking about a topic tonight. But let's do this a little bit with codename Serendipity. We have 11-year-old Sadie, and her school year is not off to a very good start, is it, Amber?
No. So my main character in codename is Sadie Mitchell Rosen, and she's going through a really difficult time in her life. It seems like ever since she turned 11 years old, one thing after another is going wrong. Her best friend moved away, who was also pretty much her only friend. Her older brother has started being a jerk. Her moms can't seem to agree on what they want for Sadie. She has this really wild imagination, and they want to nurture that, but they also want her to grow up a little bit too. And she sort of just feels caught in this tug of war between all of these different aspects of her life. And one of the big things that's going on as the story opens is that her grandfather is suffering from dementia, but no one is really being very honest with her about it. And, her grandfather, who she calls Gramps, that's sort of like her best friend. And so the book follows this family where, everything changes with the appearance of this very special stray dog that Sadie meets and discovers they have a really special connection.
Yeah, I have to tell you that the first or second chapter, I don't know which it was, where you're getting to know Sadie, I laughed out loud when she called her brother a butthead. I thought, if we're going to be talking about writing younger characters, that's exactly what an 11-year-old would call her brother, right? Yeah. So, Amber, you had your previous novels have been more intense. They've been young adult. They hadn't been this middle school. What was it that caused you to want to shift? You had a couple of New York Times best-selling books, and now you're going to shift to middle school or middle grade, I suppose. Talk about that shift and maybe a little bit how it ties into the topic we're about to launch into.
Yeah, it's been an interesting new leg of my writing journey. So I have 3 young adult novels that are kind of the older end of young adult. They deal with pretty hard-hitting, serious, real-life topics. And, with this book, codename Serendipity, I started writing what would become this book shortly after my dog, one of my dogs, I have 7 animals, my wife and I have 7 combined. But my little Darwin, he was like my soul doggy. And we just really had like just such a special bond. And after he passed away, I always pull from my personal life when I'm writing. And I felt like, I want to write something that sort of honors that really important relationship in my life with this dog. um, and it sort of just naturally led me into the middle grade world. And it's been a welcome shift. I'm still planning on writing young adult in the future as well, but I think especially during the pandemic, I needed to have something a little bit more lighthearted to be focusing on.
Yeah, what's better than a lot of obstacles and a happy ending that involves a dog, right?
Right, exactly.
That's a great segue into what we're going to do tonight. We're going to be talking about writing younger characters. And I'm just going to throw out some different topics. And the great thing, viewers, is that you're also going to hear some snippets from the books we just set up here, is that maybe some examples or some ideas about writing younger characters. We're going to start off, basically talking about this idea of voice and how to find it. I mean, I'm probably the oldest in the crowd here. So for me, remembering back what it was like in middle school or high school is harder for the two of you. But, that takes some internal research, maybe some external research. I don't know. But thinking back to what life was like, way back then, of course, you could have had some major issues and events that caused you to never to forget, those years, and maybe it's still with you. But let's talk about this topic of voice and how to find it when you're writing younger characters. I'll start with Paula.
Yeah, I actually do remember being a teenager really fondly. And so it's still kind of in my head because I had this, tight group of friends and we had a hangout, and I had friends who could drive. And so I had mobility. They had access to cars. And, I remember being at odds with my parents about what their expectations were for me. They didn't want me to go to college, for example. So I was able to draw on that pretty much to create Georgie. I mean, obviously she's living in a different time, but her voice came to me really clearly. This has happened sometimes, and it's when I think we're going to talk about point of view too. It's when I choose to write first person that I really could hear her voice, and it's almost like it becomes like a transcription of what she's saying. But with any character, and particularly with Georgie, I did a lot of free writing about her, because I knew I had read a lot of young adult fiction, and I knew some of the conventions about having a group of friends and a place to hang out, and those conflicts with parents that I could draw on. So I just did a lot of sort of free writing about her so that I could try to arrive at her authentic voice.
So are you saying, Paul, that maybe a little bit of this is, that old adage, write a little bit about what you're sort of remembering what it was like and trying to get back into that frame of mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly I'm closer to the nursing home now than I am to Georgie's age, but I still have those memories. It was actually a good time for me. I know a lot of people have a bad time in high school, but it was actually a really good time for me, and so I was able to pick up on those things that resonated for me and that I wanted to get across. That I wanted her to have this tight group of friends, and I wanted her to find fulfillment in something that she was at odds with her mother about, her mother not wanting her to be an actress. So that was something I could draw on my own experience, even though she was living in a very different time frame, and she's much, much younger than I am.
All right, well, let me, before we do a couple of readings here, let me go to Amber. Amber, let's talk a little bit about voice and how you found the voice for this. She's 11 years old. What is that, about 4th or 5th grade or something in that range?
Yeah, so Sadie's in 5th grade. And I think I chose that particular age. Well, it's funny, Paula, I totally get what you're saying about really remembering what your younger years were like. I have such vivid memories too. And I sometimes I wish I didn't remember everything quite so well.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's why I always tend to gravitate towards younger characters and narrators. But for Sadie's voice, it was definitely different than writing an older teenager. So Sadie's 11, and I distinctly remember 5th grade being such a hard time for me. And it was because it was sort of that period between like feeling like a kid and feeling like you're more of a teenager, that like 11, 12 years old age. And I remember that's the time in my life when I really started keeping journals and wanting to find creative outlets, and just really wanting to have these meaningful connections with people. And in my case and Sadie's case, animals were also a part of that friend group. And so I really just drew on a lot of my own experiences and really just tried to get inside of those memories that I had of what it was like to be that age.
That's great. You just sparked a memory in my mind. I remember my 5th grade teacher, what scared me about that was she had taught my father. And so to think about going to 5th grade and taking a class from someone who was old enough to have taught your father, and she did feel and look old, but she was the hardest teacher in the school too, and she wasn't going to give me any slack. All right, well, let's do this, because I'd like to maybe hear the voices of these characters, and I think our viewers might as well. Let's take a little snippet from. I know you got a couple of readings. Pick one that's can give us some insight into the voice of your protagonist. Paula, do you have something handy you can give us?
I do. I just wanted to read from the beginning of the book, and I'm kind of at an advantage here too with Georgie, because it is 1852, and so nobody really knows what teenagers sounded like in 1852. And I'm assuming that it's because it's a little more formal time. She has a little more mature voice, even though she is still a kid. So this is just the very beginning of the book. When the audience began hissing, I knew Othello wasn't going to end well. Their response jolted me. We weren't at the Bowery Theater, where the audience in the pit tossed apples and vegetables onto the stage if a performance didn't please them. The Prince Theater was one of New York City's finest establishments, catering to the upper 10. Worse, the actor they hissed at was my father. I was attending my first theatrical performance ever. Incredible, given that my father was a renowned leading actor, but Mama maintained the theater wasn't a place for young ladies. For my 18th birthday, she gave in to my pleading and permitted Uncle James to accompany to my father's performance of The Moor, one of his most acclaimed roles. Mama insisted I have a new dress, and my sister Maud oohed and awed over the sky blue taffeta until I wanted to take it off and give it to her. I myself put little stock in puffy lady things, especially in pastel hues. Plus, the heavy horsehair crinoline the skirt required for shape made beads of sweat trickle down my stomach. So that's just the opening, where I'm trying to get in this idea of it's very big. Clothing is very big to Georgie, as it was to me when I was 17, 18. And she's really uncomfortable in a lot of clothes that she's forced to wear. As you can imagine, women at that time were much more constrained in their clothing. So that's like a constant theme for her that I wanted to come out in the very first page.
Yeah, you get this sense that she's a bit sassy and she's a bit out there and willing to take some risk, unlike the women who apparently are just looking for a husband. That was the furthest thing from her mind. She didn't want any of that. So I really gravitated to her quickly as someone who looks like she was going to take on, Broadway, if that's what it was called back in New York City.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So Amber, we're going to go back a few years with a middle school character, and you're going to give us a little something in the voice of Sadie. Where are we in the book at this point? And tell us about what you're going to read.
So I'm also just going to read a little bit from the first chapter. This is Sadie waking up on the weekend. So I'm always the first one to wake up on Sundays because it's my favorite day. and I never want to lose any time on the weekend by spending it asleep. Weekends mean no school, no math, no waiting friendless at the bus stop, morning after morning. Weekends mean I get to video chat with my best friend Jude, who just moved to Utah. And I get to help my moms make a big Sunday morning breakfast. Weekends mean I can pretend things are still easy, the way they were before I turned 11 a few months ago. Today is no different. I hop out of bed and stick my feet into my frog slippers, which ribbit if I step hard enough on the little buttons inside the stuffing-filled frog heads, and make my way downstairs to the kitchen. My slippers echo, ribbit, 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 with each step.
That's great. I love that. I love the ribbit, 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 each step.
That's great.
And then, just a couple of lines later, when she's talking about her brother, Noah, who just turned 14, she says, he's got a girlfriend, even though he says, she's a girl who's just my friend. She's not my girlfriend. Can't you just see someone who's 14 saying that? Yeah. Although I'm not sure what they say at age 30 and 35 now when it comes to that. So as times tend to change. All right. Well, that was great. Thank you both for doing that. It gives us an insight. In Dear Miss Cushman, we have a character who's a little bit on the outside of the normative for women. And in Codename Serendipity, we find out early on that Sadie is on the outside because, she's being bullied at school. She doesn't like school. We find out she's got, I'm not sure if it's dyslexia or some learning disability. Mm-hmm. And I loved, Amber, how you talked about, and this is writing young characters too. She's saying to herself, they're talking about me as if I'm not in the room, like I've got a problem, and the same thing is true, I think, Paula, in your book, when, the men are talking around, your character, and she's like, wait a minute, I'm here, and why am I getting paid less than the men when I'm doing more and getting better reviews and all that kind of thing. So it really did give us a good insight into the characters. Both of you chose first person point of view. Speaking of point of view, let's talk about that a minute, and why you made that choice and why that choice you think is a good one for younger characters. We'll reverse it now. We'll start with Amber this time and let you address that first.
It's weird or telling, I guess. Every time I start writing a book, I'm always gravitating towards first person. And actually, I've never written from another point of view. So I guess for me, because I feel like a part of me really is the character, it's just sort of happens organically that I write from that perspective. But I definitely have been wanting to try a different point of view, but for every book, that's how it comes out. That's how it is in my head.
And how does it help you with younger characters specifically? Because, you could see in what you just read, maybe you were the kind of person that preferred weekends to school days when you were in 5th grade. Didn't we all, right? When's the bell going to ring, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I think what that could be part of the reason that when, in writing young characters, why I am just organically drawn to first person is that I think when you're young, sort of like what you were just saying, you don't want to feel like someone else is speaking for you or talking about you. And I guess that's why, saying I from the first person point of view just feels like the way a young person thinks. You don't want to seem like you're the authority like you're an outside authority to a young person's existence.
Yeah, we could go deep and dive into, the difference in first person and third person really close, but we're not going to do that today. But Paula, you've written in both third person and first person. Why did you choose first person for Dear Miss Cushman, and why do you think it works best for that novel?
A couple of reasons. First, I think there is a little bit of a convention for using first person for young adult and middle grade fiction. And I think for the reasons that Amber was talking about, that it really, it draws you in immediately. It kind of puts you in the place of the protagonist, especially when you use first person present tense. I used first person past, but it's really the most immediate point of view. And I think younger readers like that. But I read a lot of young adult fiction, and I really like that about it too. I like sort of being plunged into the story like that. And that was really why I chose to do it, was really to give you that experience of having this experience along with Georgie, or feeling like you can really get to know her. She's really someone that you've gotten to know and have become friends with, and you care about. So that seemed like the quickest way to do it for me.
Paula, I know that you had to research quite a bit, or I presume you did, to get your head around what was going on in the 1800s and in the stage scene there. I want to ask this question about research because we don't remember everything, or even if we did remember, it might not be the way it is today. I hope it's not the way it is today. For a young person growing up, they're facing a lot of different things than they are today. What do you do when it comes to research and younger characters to make sure that you're not writing about characters, in the 70s or 80s, but are writing about young characters in this time? And in your case, Paul, it's what was it like in the 1850s? So that probably took some research too.
Yeah, I was reading about, I actually read a lot about Charlotte Cushman, even though she's not the main character of my book, and she started on the stage really young. So I read biographies of her and was trying to figure out what, something about her, because it was so specific to what I was trying to do. So that was really important. And also reading some novels of the time and novels that were written for younger people was also very helpful. I also, I was thinking of, I teach undergraduates. A lot of my students are like 18, 19 years old. So I was kind of thinking about them and thinking about their voices. Not obviously it's different. There's a big time jump there, but I was kind of thinking about them as well when I was researching it. And, one pro tip is always to have young people read your stuff, and give you an honest opinion about what, does this ring true? Does this sound like an 18-year-old? Does this sound like whatever age you're writing about would be one way also to, to make sure that you're getting an authentic voice.
Yeah, that's good. Well, you couldn't actually draw on anybody that grew up in the 1850s
right.
to read your book.
Sure. Yeah.
But what about you, Amber? Did you draw on some younger characters as beta readers to read your work to see if you were on track or not?
I usually do with my young adult novels. For this middle grade novel, I actually didn't. But some of the research I did for Codename was just looking up even things like, would an 11-year-old today have access to like email, and like how much permissions are they allowed, like with computers and video chatting and things that weren't around when I was a kid. And even I remember doing quite a lot of research that I don't think ultimately made it into the book, but trying to figure out, okay, so what kind of what are today's 11-year-olds learning in math in 5th grade? Just different very practical things that I realized, I really don't know the answer to this. And it was funny just how many different rabbit holes I could go down just researching something like typing in Google, do you let your 11-year-old video chat online without supervision? So yeah. Just things like that were sort of unexpected.
Well, one of the main technological differences in your two books is in Dear Miss Cushman, she's actually writing letters longhand and then mailing them out. And Amber, in your book, you got these little scenes where they're texting, you there? Hey, what's up? Get back to me, kind of thing. Totally different. A lot of thought went into what she wrote to Dear Miss Cushman. Not a lot of thought goes into what's up.
Right.
Yeah. All right, well, look, go ahead, Paula. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was thinking about how teenagers, have it so much easier in terms of the way they can communicate, because Georgie has to go down to see Clem on the bus because she can't, just pick up her phone and call her or text her or something like that. And they make there's some reference in the book that I make to, wouldn't it be great if we had like a personal communication system? Because, I'm thinking about readers now thinking how antiquated that seems, that you have to actually physically get on the bus to go and see your friend. You can't text them, or you can't FaceTime them or anything.
Yeah, it's like when you watch the old TV shows. And actually, I was reading some old mystery novels, part of what I'm doing this year. And in Raymond Chandler's era and everywhere, they had to go find a phone booth, to make a phone call,
right,
or leave some instructions for their answering service,
right,
to pass information on to them.
right.
All right, well, let me share a couple things to this next part of the discussion here. I found a little blog online by the writer K.M. Wheeland, and on the topic, she offers some do's and don'ts. And one of the things she says is, don't make your child characters cutesy. Don't have them use baby talk. Don't make them sagely wise, but at the same time, don't make them unintelligent. And the other thing she said, which I thought was interesting, was make them unique and give them goals. And both of you did that in your books. Both of them are unique characters, and they have goals. I mean, Paula, in your book, Georgie wants to be a famous actress, and Amber, in your book, Sadie wants to rescue this dog. So I don't know if that's that much different than writing a novel with obstacles, but let's talk about that in the context of a younger character who has goals, because sometimes their goals perhaps are maybe not realistic, and yet it's part of the story arc, right? Paul, let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, Georgie's goals weren't terribly realistic, I guess, at first, but she had a heads up because her father was a famous actor, and at first she has to kind of disguise her identity because her father has disgraced her. But eventually, when she's discovered, it works in her favor to have been the daughter of a famous actor. So she has some ins to the stage. It wasn't. It wouldn't have been that easy for a young woman to do that. And really what was expected was her just to marry, and to marry well, and to be, her mother's parading her down Broadway on Saturday and Sunday so that people can get a good look at her like she's a horse or another, livestock or something. But that's really what it was like for women. So it's both not realistic, but there were women who did do this. Charlotte Cushman, as I said, became very famous in her day. Even though we don't know her today, she was as famous as Lady Gaga or someone of that caliber today.
Yeah. So Amber, talk about it from your perspective and your character. The sort of the goal setting. We learn early. When she meets this dog that she thinks she's telepathically connected to, that she has it in her mind that she's going to save this dog, but there are a lot of humans in the way that are older than her that are putting up obstacles. And as we talked about earlier, she can't drive. She's got to depend on the kindness of strangers, but maybe in her case, the kindness of her grandfather who's got dementia, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is really important to give young people realistic goals and unrealistic goals that are realistically unrealistic too. So I mean, Sadie has this idea that there's this dog that needs help, and I know this because the dog is telling me. Of course, she can't convince anyone else of that, and she can't just bring a stray dog into her house because her moms aren't going to let her do that. So she has all of these things that are getting in her way. And then her grandfather sort of becomes almost a co-conspirator with her, and is also coming up with these sort of nutty plans to help her. But I wanted to also make sure I gave her other kind of more personal or like character development type goals. Like, she's an artist and she's been working on this graphic novel. And, that's one of the things, that a thread that sort of continues through the book. As Sadie is growing and learning and, interacting with her grandfather and her new friend that she makes, and this really special dog, she's learning about herself, and that sort of, is reflected in what she's having this fictional character in her own little graphic novel doing as well.
Amber, you made a really interesting comment there where you said you should give these younger characters realistic goals, but also realistic, unrealistic goals. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right. If you've got a younger character, we all had aspirations that maybe weren't very realistic, but they need to be in the narrative, right, for the book to be realistic.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so important, and of course that's great fodder for fiction, for things to go really wrong when you have a really bad plan.
Well, let's do this. I got one more thing I want to talk about, but you each got another little reading I think you got for us. I think Paula went first last time. I'll let Amber, what do you have for us for this little reading?
I am going to read a little bit further into the book. It carries on from it's the same day that I read from in the beginning, but this is the scene where she is about to meet this dog. I hear barking coming from the woods behind our backyard. There are old paths and trails that run through the woods, and sometimes people in the neighborhood hike them. Sometimes they bring their dogs with them. So it's not that unusual. The unusual part is that the barking sounds like it's getting closer, louder, more insistent. I take a few steps away from the fairy fortress and begin walking toward the back fence to see if I can get a better look. I reach the gate that leads out into the woods, and the barking gets louder. Underneath all the other sounds, the barking, the rustle of dried leaves under my feet, the swish of the wind around me, I hear something else, a word, a feeling. Help. Looking all around, I can't tell which direction it's coming from. I cup my hands around my mouth and call, hello? Please help. It's like a voice in my head, but not my own. To the left, I see the leaves of the overgrown shrubbery moving and shaking. Even though I know moms don't like me going into the woods by myself, I lift the latch of the gate. The branches and brush tremble like there's an invisible wave moving through them. As I walk toward the bushes, everything suddenly gets very still and quiet. I squint, trying to see beneath the layers of leaves and branches. That's when I see two eyes, one blue and one brown, watching me closely. It's a dog.
That's great. And just for our viewers, what you said there was not an extra S on mom that was accidental. It was on purpose. So explain that for our viewers, because you're bringing into this narrative, Sadie has two mothers, right? And she calls them the moms, right?
Yeah, exactly. As an LGBTQ person myself, I like to find ways to bring in some elements of queer representation into my books in some way. And with Codename, I chose to give this character two moms, and so so she calls them Mom and Mama, and it was just sort of a nice way for me to kind of just bring in a little bit more diversity into this book, and you know, diversity that is, part of my identity as well.
Well, it certainly shortens the conversation, but because instead of the older brother saying, Mom and Dad are going to be really upset with you, it's the moms are going to be upset with you. Right?
Right.
All right. So, Paula, you got another reading for us. Where are we in the book at this point?
So this is maybe about a fourth of the way through the book. And I was thinking of my own experience with, like I said, my group of friends in high school. And Georgie makes friends really early on with a guy named Ned, who's a year older than she is. And they have kind of this brother-sister thing going on. And I was thinking of the fact, like, I didn't realize when I was 17, 18 that I was gay, and the young male friends that I had didn't realize, and a lot of them came out later too, but we were friends and something drew us to each other. And so this is a little back and forth between Ned and Georgie. Ned has gotten Georgie to come down to meet his parents under false pretenses, and she's very angry with him. When his mother disappeared, I poked Ned hard in the ribs and hissed, "What in the world did you tell them?" He cast his eyes down, so I poked him again until he was forced to look at my anger head on. I may have given them the impression you were my girl. Ned! I didn't say it outright, Georgie. It was just a bit of a hint, kind of like, there's this special girl I'd like you to meet, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Why would you do that? You know it isn't true. Well, you are special, Georgie. That's the truth. Oh, please. My thoughts raced to the worst case in this scenario. Please say you didn't tell them we planned to marry. His silence suggested the worst. Blast it, Ned. I didn't, Georgie, I swear, he said. They may have assumed it, but I never, ever said it outright. I flopped onto the settee. You lured me into a trap. Ned sat next to me and took my hand as if assuming the role of suitor. I yanked it back into my lap.
It's great. Yeah, I love her spot. She's fun to follow around. Okay, well, as we finish up here, I want to actually deal with the topic that came to my attention in reading both these books. And while it probably applies to lots of different novels, I think it takes on a different role with younger characters. And it's the importance, I think, of them grappling with real world issues. And Amber, you do this with 3 or 4 different issues in your book. She loses a friend. Her grandfather's got dementia. The moms are talking about her in front of her. She's not there, and then talking behind her back to, at some point, she has to let them know, look, I'm not an idiot. I know, talk to me. Tell me what's going on. So in doing that, it's almost like what you're doing with your young adult novels. You're trying to maybe create a connection, there for someone who might be experiencing some of the same things, and letting them know, look, you're not alone. They're not treating you this way because it's just you, but this happens in real life to all kids whose parents don't give them the time of day, right? Like they should. Talk about the importance of letting them grapple with and come to terms with and learn about these adult issues from a different perspective, and how that perspective makes it a little bit unique in how you approach it.
Yeah, I think it was definitely important for me to give Sadie, some of those goals and obstacles that she could overcome, but then obstacles and situations that were not even in her control. And I think it's important for young people, and I mean, really for any age person, to be able to see, some of their own problems reflected in a fictional character. So yeah, with Sadie, I mean, one of the big things that she's grappling with is, she's being treated like a kid. Her moms, are not telling her the truth about her grandfather, but yet they want her to grow up, but they won't treat her like she's, mature enough to handle the truth. And so she does reach a point where she has to stand up to her to her parents. And that's really kind of a game changer for her. And I think, that was one thing I definitely wanted to include in the book, because it's, I think that's really hard for a young person to be able to do. And maybe if there's some kind of a model for, the pitfalls and kind of what works and doesn't work when you're trying to kind of claim your voice and stand your ground.
Did you have to kind of go put yourself in the mind of an 11-year-old, because you showed frustration, you showed, angst, disappointment, fear, anxiety. Did you have to kind of go there to kind of get that on the page for this particular character?
Yeah, definitely. I really thought back to a lot of, my own frustrations as a young person.
Now, Paula, as far as I know, you haven't teleported back to the mid 1800s, and you weren't on stage back then, but some of the issues that you deal with and that Georgie, also called George, deals with, is this fight against what's normative, and she's not in that group, and she's learning about her identity as she goes on. Are you also trying to continue to place some of those issues in this, but it's not as overt as some of your other books are dealing with the topic, perhaps, and yet it's part of her arc nonetheless. Talk about that a little bit, because that's one of the things. It's a real world issue, and one that today we might say, it's not, it's not a big an issue, but back then, if her mother were to know some of the things she was thinking, she might have had her put in a home or something, right?
Yeah, that would have been pretty serious. I wanted Georgie to grapple with that. It's always has struck me as really sort of mind-boggling that people in the mid 1800s and earlier than that even could there was no gay identity at that time. There was there was no real community. There was no way to really express what you were feeling. So I have her dealing a lot with what does this mean? I'm kind of liking this other girl. Is that even possible? Oh, that's kind of weird, So I have her dealing with that and trying to sort of get through that in her head without having any language for it. And the other thing that I really consciously wanted her to deal with that I knew would resonate for young people, but for adults as well, is that she's dealing with harassment at work. So that kind of thing, I mean, I've heard my own students talk about that a lot, and I remember it from being in school and then being, in my first job, and that was a really big issue for girls, and that she's just kind of blown away. She's young and naive and doesn't really know what to do and how to handle it. So that was something that I really wanted to talk to, because that's something that resonates no matter when, what the setting or time frame of your book. That's something that is going to resonate for readers. So I really wanted that to be something that girls can look at and say, look at how Georgie dealt with it, or Georgie was able to come out on the other side of that.
That's great. Well, both of you have done something a little different than you've done before, and so in the final question here, so I'll just stay with Paula for a second. You've going back in time. You're dealing, with this historical aspect. You're in a time period that's totally different. Some of these have been more modern day books that you've written. How was that experience for you, and how has it advanced your own writing?
It was so much fun. I loved it so much. I'm a total theater geek, and I just loved learning about how theaters ran, a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And I got to go and visit Wilmington, North Carolina, where there's like one of the few mid 19th century theaters still in existence. You can go and visit it in Wilmington. And I just had the best time researching it. And I got very, very interested in this period in history. before the Civil War, but I think I'm going to revisit this period at some point, and I think I probably will revisit these characters, especially I have it in mind to do something about Clem next time, that the next book might be told from Clem's point of view, because I really think she has a lot to offer in terms of trying to be a young writer as well, that could speak to people.
Essentially, where is this place in Wilmington? I've not heard of this before.
It's Thalian Hall is the name of it, and it's you can go. We had a tour with the theater director. It's really wonderful. They have the old curtains, the old painted curtain that was on the original theater. It's just a really great place, really place to go. And the director who took us on the tour let me stand on the stage. So I stood on the stage and pretended I was Georgie, staring down into the footlights.
Did you recite some Hamlet while you were on the stage?
Right, yeah.
I think you said also somewhere that they have an old thunder making machine or something there?
Yeah, it's called a thunder roll, and it was literally it's like a wooden chute, and they would drop cannonballs down it to clack into each other, and that made the sound of thunder. So that's very cool.
Interesting. Well, Amber, last question to you. You've done the young adult. Now you're in the middle grade. What did that teach you about writing that you didn't know before, and how is that advancing your own writing?
I really, it's been a really interesting process, because it's, middle grade is sort of like in the same grouping of young adult, but it was definitely a different experience. I think I went into it being my first middle grade novel thinking in some ways, well, I'm not having to dive deep into really dark emotional issues. And so I thought on some level, it's also not as long as a young adult novel. And I think I thought, oh, piece of cake. I have the concept. I'll be able to just knock this out in a few months. And it was the thing that surprised me is that it was so much harder to write than I thought it would be. And for different reasons, getting into the mind of my 11-year-old character, that was a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. And also having that, lower word count limit, it really challenged me as a writer to really hone in on the important plot points. And I'm definitely more of a pantser, so I can just write and go off on a tangent for 50 pages. So I really had to rein myself in and figure out, okay, what is important? What do I really need to say? And I don't know. Yeah, I think writing this book on some level really helped me kind of hone in on my writing skills.
That's great. All right, so this is the time we're going to let you tell us where they can find the book and where they can find you with your website. And then I've got one final thing. So Paula, where can people find your book, and what's your website?
My website is paulamartinac.com. My books are all there. You can order it from my publisher, Bywater Books, or at any of your favorite bookstores, or Amazon, or any of your favorite independent bookstore, any of those places.
Okay. Is there going to be an audiobook in the future for this?
That I don't know yet. I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Amber, what about you?
So you can find all of my information on my website. It's ambersmithauthor.com. And you can buy my books. There are links in my website, but I think it's pretty much available from, whatever your favorite retailer is. There is an audiobook edition, which, I've heard a little sneak peek of it, and it's really good.
That's good. Yeah, we could have a whole session on narrating audiobooks for middle grade, probably, because that takes a skill set too. Well, this has been wonderful. Before you say goodbye today, I just want to let viewers know that we've already got something lined up for next month. We're going to be doing Overcoming Struggles in Writing and Marketing, and the two authors are going to be Kathy Izzard. She's an award-winning author and speaker, whose latest book is The Last Ordinary Hour. It's a story about a severe medical problem that upended her life, but as she says, it's not a book about dying, rather a book about living. And Katherine Farley, author of Desert to Dawn, a guided devotional to discover peace and purpose, where she merges her professional experience as a physical therapist and her personal journey, covering some severe anxiety, panic disorder, and PTSD to find a life-giving journey of her own. And these books will serve as the foundation for our conversation, Overcoming Struggles in Writing and Marketing. So nobody ever has struggles in marketing or writing, right?
Right.
First of all, I want to thank you, Paula, for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and Amber, thanks for being on the show too.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
And thanks to all you out there in viewership land for tuning in to Charlotte Readers Live. We really appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. We look forward to sharing more about the reading and writing lives of our authors on the regular podcast and these future live events. So with that said, read on.